Okay, this is, as I said, in Boulder County, Colorado. This is a site at 10,000 feet, almost to the Continental Divide. So it's a real challenge with weather and a lot of other things you'll see as I go along. But I'm going to tell you just basically a little bit about the background of Caribou. This was a kind of a I was going to say flash in the pan mining town, but it actually was Colorado's first major silver rush. So it was really important in Colorado's history, but silver was discovered there in 1869. It was named for Caribou, British Columbia, with a slightly different spelling. And this was a photo taken in the 1880s, showing some of the women that lived in the town. This was very much of a family town. This is what miners were looking for here in Caribou, the silver specimen. And just to show you a little bit about the town, it was at the height of its rush in the 1870s and 1880s. It was not, by other mining town standards, not large. It had 549 people in 1880, but for Caribou, that was a lot of people. It was plagued with fires, snow, wind. I mean, just about anything you could think of that would devastate a very tiny mining community this high up in elevation. The only thing left now there are a few stone buildings that came kind of later in its development that are still there, but this is this is the last remaining miner's cabin. I've been visiting this site. I live about an hour away. I've been visiting this site for about 30 years. I've watched that building fall down. When I first visited, it had 2 rooms. You could go inside. It had a roof. And now it's just a few walls that's left. Now, just like as Mike was saying, a lot of the early miners came from Cornwall. And as you all know, I won't go into details about Cornish mining, but they were leaving their life in England and going to other places all over the world. What I want to emphasize here is the culture shock and the climate change for them. They were used to sea level and palm trees. And suddenly they were living in a place like this, where they had been used to stone, what they called cottages, stone houses in Cornwall. And they were suddenly moving into drafty log cabins that they were building in a big hurry in Caribou. But they brought their families, and the impact was mostly on the women and the children. I mean, the men were underground mining, so that didn't affect them as much as the rest of the families. Now, they also had wealthy investors, and 2 of the early ones were Abel Breed and Benjamin Cutter. And Breed was a coffin manufacturer from Cincinnati. I don't know what credentials that gave him to be a wealthy mining investor, but it's interesting to me because I'm going to talk about the cemetery. So I just found that an intriguing sideline here. And this is a picture of Abel Breed with what's called a samovar, which was a new word to me until I started doing this research, but it's the Russian word apparently for a silver. It doesn't have to be silver, but a tea service or coffee service to boil water. And Caribou's kind of claim to fame was this sidewalk made of silver bricks. And these were bricks that were made out of Caribou silver, and they were used when President Grant visited Central City. And Central City is in Gilpin County, which is the next county over from Boulder. So when he got out of his carriage, as the stories say, and you don't know how much to believe of what you read in some of these old newspapers, but he apparently got out of his carriage and stepped on the silver bricks to walk a short distance anyway in Central City. So that did make all the newspapers. So if you're wondering where Caribou is, if you're familiar with the Denver Boulder area, it's west of Boulder, and then you go to Nederland, and then it's up a rather rough road up to the town of Caribou. So I was talking with somebody here earlier who is in the Denver area that wanted to know specifically where the cemetery is. If you have a question about that, see me afterwards, because it's complicated. It's not right in the town site. It's off on another road. It's kind of hidden, but since most of you are not familiar with that immediate area, I won't go into that right now. But what I really want to talk about is the cemetery, and this is very neglected. There are no stones left. There were known burials of maybe 30 people. The first was in 1875, and the early ones, the ones that we know the most about, it was between 1875 and 1898. But there's no records. I mean, all this has to be reconstructed from newspaper reports, and then also someone came in the 30s and did kind of a survey of the cemetery. So we have some names, but these stones were very sadly vandalized in the 40s, 50s, 60s, that time period. And there were no burials at all for 60 years. And then in recent years, there have been 8 more burials. But we think there's probably more like 60 burials, because people talked about others that we haven't found names for, but we know of about 30. And as Mike says, you know, we're waiting for the snow to melt, actually. There's still snow up there. But one of the things you do in the winter is do your genealogy. So we've been working on trying to figure out more about some of these people, and that's an ongoing process. And I should mention, when I say we, this is a project of a couple local residents, and I'm just one of them, that we're trying to raise awareness, and also we're trying to raise some funds as well to give some dignity and respect back to these people who are buried here. Now, the gravestones that were there, we do have photos of some of them, and they're just spectacular. This is the gravestone of Margaret Perkins. I have no idea who carved it, where it came from. I read one report that said something about sending all the way back to Cornwall to have somebody carve it. I don't have any idea if that's true or not, but it's possible. But I haven't found anything yet in any old newspapers that tells me where the stone actually came from. But this was one of them, and this is the only burial site where we actually know where she's buried, and that's because of the iron fence. You'll see that in another photo. The iron fence is still there, but her stone is gone. So just like in any mining cemetery, a lot of the burials of the men were mine accidents, and this is just one of the newspaper articles about the mine accident. There were a lot of babies, diphtheria, scarlet fever. And again, as Mike said, women died in childbirth or complications from childbirth. This is a stone that was still there in 1972. Some of these stones say that the people came from Cornwall. And also, as Mike said, in the census records, they say England, but that's what, they didn't differentiate Cornwall from England. It just said England. But some of these stones actually said that they were from Cornwall. So again, all we have is some newspaper reports, some very skimpy surveys, and some photographs. Now, this one I know a little bit more about because I did some research on her. This is Mary Webster. She came with her husband and went to New Jersey first. So she stopped off in the east, and this is they didn't come directly necessarily from Cornwall to Caribou, but they came to various places, and some of them ended up in Cornwall. And this, remember, friends, as you pass by, as you are now, so once was I, as I am now, so you must be. Prepare for death and follow me. This is very common. You see this on a lot of stones, and you see them back in England for centuries. So it just, it gives me more of a reason to want to try to remember these people, to give some respect back to where they are. This is a photo here on the left of the fence that was around Mary Webster Stone. As I said before, the only fence that's left is the iron one. The stone fences have all collapsed. And then on the right is a gravestone for the Richards family. They lost 3 children within a week. I mean, it's just hard to imagine their lives and what they went through. This is a quote here of someone that visited the cemetery in 1915. He said, I remember 2 rows of babies in that old cemetery with just a path in between. But again, you can see some of the photos of these stones. And what's really fascinating to me is that they're all different. So that's going to be helpful when we go back to trying to figure out who was where, because you can see, like in the background of a photo, you can try to figure out, oh, that maybe that's this person or that person. And that's what we're going to be doing this summer. But I just got an email this morning from a friend of mine who's working on this project, and she went up there yesterday, and she said there's still snow. Hard to believe, but there's still snow there. So this is a photo from 1951. You can see that one of the stones has already been broken off. Now, whether that was from vandalism or just the weather or what, nobody knows. But in the early 50s, people were beginning to take notice that the cemetery was in disrepair. There was a restoration effort in 1953, and this is a county commissioner and the editor of the local newspaper. They put up a sign. There had been a sign originally, but the sign disappeared somehow over the years. So in 1953, there was a new sign, and that's one of the things that we plan to do in our restoration is create a new sign. Not quite sure what it'll say on it, but it'll be at the entrance of the cemetery so people know that it's a cemetery. This was a postcard that was also published in 1953 during this time of the restoration, and they put up a fence. And again, there had been a fence originally, and it disappeared over the years. And that's, again, one of our goals. We hope to do that this summer, put up a fence, because there's all kinds of, this is sort of a recreation area now. And if we have a fence, at least somebody will know that there's something there that's worthy of preserving and taking care of. Right now, there've been people camping and having campfires on the grave sites, and I mean it's been pretty much used to be neglected. Now it's really abused. Some of you are aware of Tom Hendricks. He was a miner in the Caribou area in more recent times. And that's a picture of me, actually, with Tom in 1989. We'd just been through the Cross Gold Mine. This is a silver producing area, but his mine happened to have predominantly gold, which is what he mined in it. But he loved this area. He died in 2020, and he really wanted to preserve the cemetery as well. In 1991, he wrote a letter to the State Historical Society and tried to get grant funds to repair it. I think I can really credit him, as well as the earlier effort in the 1950s. I can credit Tom with really wanting to do something, but his hands were kind of tied. He didn't get the grant. It never happened, but He's buried there now. I'll get to that in a minute, but this is what the cemetery looked like in 2019. You saw those earlier photos where you could actually see the mountains in the background. Trees have grown up, and this is on property that's privately owned. It's owned by Grand Island Resources. They're a mining company that is, I don't want to say off and on, but right now they don't have a crew, but they are currently working another mine nearby. But they own this property, and they're being very helpful and wanting to help us, and they're actually part of this restoration effort. But they went in and cut down all these trees, and this is what it looks like now. So our very first job when the snow melts is to get a crew up there, and what we're going to do with our first donations. We already have some donations, and some of them came from people in MHA, and I want to thank you all for that. But I think the first thing we're going to do is rent a chipper, and we're going to get a work day up there with some local people and clear off all this debris and chip up the branches, and then we'll actually be able to get in and see what the cemetery looks like now. But I took some pictures a couple years ago. This is the fence of Margaret Perkins, the iron fence that surrounds her grave. This is the only known location because of the fence that we know that this is her location. And this is Margaret Perkins' stone, that beautiful one that I showed you in the beginning. So as you can see from this picture above, this is what the graves look like now. They're all broken off, but there's a little bit at the bottom of some of them, and there's the bases that they're on. And we've got people to help with the clearing and the debris, and somebody's in charge of the sign, and somebody else is in charge of the fence. And I think it's going to be down to me to try to figure out who's buried where. If anybody is particularly interested in genealogy and trying to trace people and want to correspond with me, that would be great. But what I plan to do is figure out these stones in the background, and that should be fairly easy to do from the old photographs, who is who, and then stand at Margaret Perkins' iron fence, and then I can kind of figure out, okay, from here, looking that way, that person must be this person. I mean, that's really the only way that we can try to figure this out. And we're going to have some cadaver dogs come up. We might use LiDAR as well and see if there's some other bodies that we don't know about. The most recent burial was Tom Hendricks. And as I mentioned before, he was such a part of Caribou's history. We kind of feel like we owe it to him. The photo on the left was from his burial. And then Ed and I went up and visited a few months later. He's got a cross there made out of drill steel. He has a widow and a child, and they have a stone for him, but they haven't placed it yet. So we are accepting tax-deductible donations through the Netherland Area Historical Society. So if anybody's interested, we have a website. It's just cariboucemetery.com. And I threw in a couple of old-timer jokes, mostly for you, Mark. Thank you.